Let me share the screen. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good evening. My name is Lee Brown, and I'm president of Tesca Associates. We have been preparing this presentation, originally starting back in the summer of 2015. Tesca was retained to assist the village in the development of the comprehensive plan, which was ultimately adopted in 2018. And those of you who were involved in that process certainly remember that village finances were a considerable issue that is included within the comprehensive plan. And one chapter, 13, includes a section on village finances, which under the subheading of investment to achieve development and fiscal goals / tax increment financing, the subject area itself near Illinois 53 and Lake Hook Road was specifically addressed. And also the area was addressed with a sub-area plan that is graphically shown on that screen. As one of the early implementation strategies for the comprehensive plan, in the fall of 2019, the village asked us to prepare a stepwise scope for establishing a TIF district for this area. So since January of 2020, we have been evaluating property, going through the process of identifying the characteristics which support the establishment of a tax increment district, making those reports available to the village in a series of meetings we had both in person and in Zoom, and then finally making recommendations which were brought to both the Joint Review Board and now to the public at this public hearing. Let me start by including the briefest of TIF 101 so we're all on the same page. First, tax increment is an economic development technique that allows future property taxes from a designated area to pay for project improvements within that area, and the program lasts up to 23 years. Some things to keep in mind. TIF is not a tax of itself, and nor does it freeze the taxes of an individual property owner or any property owners within the district. The TIF is a tool to leverage private investment. Its purpose, therefore, is to use public investment to encourage the reinvestment and future investments in property within the district. And unlike other economic development tools, the tax rates are the same whether you're in a tax district, a TIF, tax increment finance district, or not. So ultimately, the statute, the Tax Increment Finance Act, proposes to eliminate blighting conditions or those conditions that lead to blight, promote economic development within a community, and enhance the tax base for all taxing jurisdictions. This is probably one of the best known graphics associated with a TIF district, and it tries to establish some basic concepts. First, if you'll look at this graph as being along the x-axis, a timeline into the future, starting with the year that the TIF is established and then moving forward to up to 23 years. And the y-axis being equalized assessed value or value of property within the within the TIF district itself. In the beginning, in the starting year, we establish what is a baseline. What is the EAV within the district to be compared to over the life of the district? It doesn't freeze the taxes at that point. It simply says this is the current EAV at the time of the adoption, and increases over time will be measured against that. The difference between what it was at the beginning and what it is equalized assessed value at any given point during the life of the district is called the incremental change or incremental value that would be taxed. The tax rates of each of the taxing jurisdictions is applied to that incremental change, and the funds that are TIF incremental revenues that are the result of that application of the same tax rates that everyone else in the village pays, those same incremental revenues are available to the TIF district to pay for projects, public projects that will ultimately generate the revenues to pay back the costs of those projects. When the TIF district is done at the end of the life of the district, and that is no later than 23 years from the start, then the increase in equalized assessed valuation is available to all of the taxing jurisdictions to going forward to increase their property tax base. So what we're trying to generate is what's called a virtuous cycle. Public improvements, public investments are made, which encourage private investment. That, as a result, increases the value of properties within this TIF district, which generates incremental taxes that are revenues able to pay for public improvement to start the cycle again, and ultimately increasing the value of property that's available for each of the taxing jurisdictions going into the future. TIF funds can be used for eligible project costs that benefit the district and eliminate the impediments to the redevelopment, including, and commonly, public utilities. And those could be everything from underground utilities to streetscape improvements to road improvements, the environmental cleanup and preparation of property to make it available for new development or redevelopment, the assembly of property into developable sites, the cost of financing projects, and then specifically, the Act does not allow for the use of those TIF funds for direct funding of private buildings, new buildings. It can provide assistance for the rehabilitation of existing buildings, but it cannot pay for the construction costs of building new buildings. The project area boundaries that's being proposed for a TIF district are outlined here in red. Generally, Lake Cook Road on the south is the village boundary, and Illinois Route 53 and just a hair of property along the, I guess that's not a particularly technical term, a strip of property exists within the village along the western boundary of Illinois Route 53. And each of these properties shown here are within the village. The TIF district has to be a contiguous area, so all the properties within the area must touch, and all the properties within the TIF district must be within the village itself. There are explicitly excluding the Menards building, which you see here, is excluded from the proposed district. The remaining properties that are in this district show this one recognized as the Geimer properties, which includes an existing building, and one single family home at the very southwest corner of the village and of the TIF district itself. 18 total parcels, approximately 60 acres. The findings of our study identify the characteristics that meet the statutory requirements for establishing a conservation district form of tax increment financing, which is to say that 50% or at least 1/2 of the buildings exceeds 35 years in age. In this case, there are 2 structures within the district, one of which exceeds the 35 years of age, which then allows for at least 3 other characteristics to be found, and therefore eligibility for conservation. In this case, we find obsolescence, deterioration, excessive vacancy of property, lack of community planning as technically established in the Act, environmental remediation, and loss or relative decline in equalized assessed value within the district. And I'll try to explain these as we go through. Age of building, again, the single family home exceeds the 35 years in age, though the Grimer building does not. We have 50% of the buildings within the district. Obsolescence is a technical term identified in the Act, which speaks to the conditions or the process of falling into disuse or structures that have become ill-used for their originally designed purpose. And evidence on the site includes original design of the Grimer building and facilities for the garden store, no longer used for those purposes, and some attempts have been made for modifications to the building to meet current conditions. Still, the building itself is no longer usable for its original intent. Dilapidation is a characteristic of the physical defects in the structures which inhibit the reuse or effective use of the property. And there's quite a bit of that, particularly in the Grimer site. Excessive vacancies, both within the buildings and of properties that are vacant and unused. Deterioration includes both deterioration of physical buildings and structures, but also surface conditions that are on the sites which impede the reuse and practical economic use of property. And there are quite a number of both buildings and physical features on these sites that are considered deterioration of the physical nature of property. Inadequate utilities, in this case, lack of access or extent of water or sewer to some of the properties on this within the area. And this chart, which is even to me rather small and difficult to read, identifies the decline or relative decline in equalized assessed value in 3 out of the 5 years in which the most recent 5 years of assessment. And so you can see in the year 2015, there was a 7.64% decline in the equalized value of the properties that are shown within the proposed district. In 2018, a 20% decline. In 2019, a 1.7% decline. And if you look closely, you can also see relative to the village as a whole, there were 3 out of 5 years that relative to the increased values, or in some cases decreased value of the village as a whole, the area in question decreased or increased at a rate that makes the project area eligible under the statute. The redevelopment plan includes a description of impact to other taxing jurisdictions. There are, remembering that the value of the existing properties within the district are still available to be taxed by the other taxing jurisdictions. And if their tax rates go up, the taxes within that area also go up. The impacts are described in more detail in the redevelopment plan, but suffice to say that the overall intent of increasing the equalized assessed value ultimately provides an increased value to all the taxing jurisdictions during this time. The statute requires consistency with the comprehensive plan, and as we identified, there are specific references in the comprehensive plan to the benefit of tax increment, and specifically noting this area as a potential candidate area. The redevelopment plan includes a proposed TIF budget. The TIF budget is based on the likely or maximum equalized assessed value that increase and the available funds that would be generated for public improvements. We have a series of categories of public improvements that may prove appropriate for the redevelopment and assistance to property redevelopment. And we have given a series, a range, if you will, of potential project costs within each of those categories. The important bottom line is that the total of all of those would not be exceeding $7,254,000. there is likely essentially a swapping or availability in any given category for more or less than the project costs that are shown here. Remember that this budget and the adoption of redevelopment project itself does not create the authority to spend these monies. Those are done project by project by the village board at the time that those projects would be sought. And the approval of the redevelopment plan does not guarantee that these monies would be made available or would be available for your use. They simply create what amounts to an upper end or a cap on the amount that could be or would be available if those redevelopment projects generated increment. The anticipated outcomes of the project, first, we would seek to alleviate those conditions which made the project area eligible in the first place. So the series of conditions that I rattled off, ultimately the construction and occupancy of non-residential redevelopment within the area, so that increment would be generated and available for the taxing jurisdictions. Growth in the tax base from an existing equalized assessed value of $2.4 million to an estimated $18.5 million at the end of the life of the district, and growth in annual property taxes to all the jurisdictions from its current $215,000 per year to upwards of $2 million a year on the basis of that increase in tax base. And that is the end of this presentation, and I will figure out shortly how to stop my share and answer your questions.